You know, we are not a united room. There are some liberal Democrats among us, and we will be respectful, just as they are, of course, to us. Some of them are, and I treasure those who are. And by the way, if you can't hear me, just sneer at me or something. And Darcy Olsen, the president herself, is signaling. How's it going, Darcy? Right. It does move. Ah, I bet that's better. Shall I repeat what I said? No. Okay. Never been accused of being too quiet. I want to talk a little bit, maybe riff a little bit about your favorite subject, President Obama. And I suppose he is president. It's taken me a while to adjust. He's several months into it. And, you know, during the 8 years of Bill Clinton, a lot of people on the left accused people of me, like me, of never really accepting Clinton as our president. We never really accepted the legitimacy of his presidency. And I have to admit that I was just a tiny bit guilty myself. I never quite reconciled myself to a Clinton presidency. But there he was for 8 years. And it seems like we've had a lot of Obama already, and he's barely begun. I mean, his re-election is 3.5 years off. And so, settle and get used to it. We'll see. There are no sure things in American politics. We'll see. I remember when I first encountered the idea of Barack Obama, really as a phenomenon, as a political star. It was the summer of 2004, and he was in the Illinois State Legislature. And he was gearing up to run for the Senate. He had given this big convention speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention. And I attended a Renaissance weekend. I don't know if you remember what those are, but those are those big Clintonian affairs, and they're resorts across America, and they're really liberal or moderate liberal events run by a wonderful couple named Phil and Linda Later. And I was there as sort of a conservative token. And I wrote a piece about it called The Joy of Tokenism. And they were, and I do believe in philosophical and political tokenism, not other kinds, racial and so on. But the diversity that is really right is diversity of thought, as you know. But I remember this squealing about this youngish Illinois state legislator, and he was so new that they really weren't sure of his name, which name was first or which name was last. Was he Obama Barack or Barack Obama? But I remember them just squealing about him like Bobby Soxers for Frank Sinatra or something. And he was really a redemptive figure for them. He faced almost no opposition in Illinois, sadly, and was elected, and immediately started running for president. A lot of us said, no way, but way. And he did run for president, and his principal opponent in the Democratic primaries was, of course, Hillary Clinton, and oddly enough, Hillary ran as the moderate or conservative candidate, and Barack Obama was the standard bearer of left liberalism. He ran a very left campaign in the primaries, won by the skin of his teeth. Hillary ran a very wrong-headed campaign in the first half before she got her act together. Then I think she realized something like 11 primaries in a row, but Obama accumulated enough points for delegates. And one thing I've always thought about Obama, perhaps you agree, is that he's been very lucky in his opposition. Yes, he's a good candidate, a very good candidate, a very good politician. I think he's a tad overrated, though. He had no opposition in Illinois, and Hillary ran a very poor campaign at first in the primaries, and I believe that our own Senator McCain ran not a good campaign. And so Obama has waltzed into almost every office he's held. But, of course, luck is a political asset. So there was Obama, the Democratic nominee, and then he did this remarkable, and some of us nauseating pivot to the center in the general election. And he campaigned as sort of a moderate, and all this gassy rhetoric. As long as I'm speaking frankly about our president, I do think he doesn't appeal to me as a rhetorician very much, I must say. I know he's supposed to be the greatest speaker since Pericles or something, but I just think he's so empty and so cliched, and all these Marxist grad student remarks and stuff people said when they got high in the dorms, but with a certain polish, so. And you remember how he sounded like a moderate Democrat or even a conservative Democrat in the presidential debates, those 3 televised affairs in which we got shellacked, really. I don't think the same is true of the vice president. as this David Boren type Democrat, or even a Sam Nunn type Democrat, or even a moderate Republican. He even cited Richard Lugar, his friend in the Senate, as someone who would have an influence on him. And I remember him saying in particular, this is just one little fact or statement from those 3 debates. He said he was for missile defense. I almost fell out of my chair. I said, oh, that's fabulous. Why don't we vote for him? And one delicious fact, though discouraging fact, is that about a month and a half ago, after North Korea launched one of its long-range missiles, the administration announced drastic cuts in missile defense, which is like the Obama some of us thought we would have. So I must say, even though this is ancient history, 2008 presidential campaign, I don't accept necessarily that Obama's election and McCain's defeat, I don't believe that outcome was inevitable. There was a lot going against the Republican Party that year. The wind was completely at their back, the Democrats' back, absolutely in our face. And John McCain has a great many virtues. I thought he ran an inept campaign. His vice presidential nominee, his running mate, was widely vilified, demonized, made it a kind of laughingstock. The Republican incumbent in the White House was deeply unpopular, undeservedly, I would say, but very unpopular. The war in Iraq was very, very unpopular. The media were just about 100% against our guy and 100% in favor of the other guy. And then, in September, we had the collapse of the financial markets, facing the worst such situation since 1929. And John McCain and Sarah Palin got 46% of the vote. 60 million Americans voted for these people. I mean, the support for the Republican Party is not some weird minority taste. That's a lot of votes. And I don't believe the Republican Party is dead. It's more like sleeping for a bit, and will awaken again. I'll tell you what was wrong earlier this year. Barack Obama and his people had nothing in their way, no obstacles. There's a famous pop song about no obstacles in my way, or I see all the obstacles in my way, and they didn't have any. Consider, there was this big election, substantial majority, not landslide material, but a good, sizable majority. He was thought to be correctly a historic president, everyone rooting for him, or almost everyone. I remember when dissent used to be the highest form of patriotism, not the age of Obama. Oh, no. You remember how those Tea Party participants were treated by the mainstream media. So he had these big majorities in the House and Senate, and of course his 100% media support. And because of our economic problems, the country was rocked back on its heels. People were very fearful, and they were willing to accept that which they would not accept in normal times, in times of prosperity or relative prosperity. I mean, something like that stimulus package could never have gone through in a normal period. So it was a perfect storm for us. They could do almost anything. They had great, great political power. It was their moment, and still is, to a degree, of course. And they ran that stimulus home. Almost no one read it. And it really wasn't a stimulus package. It was a collection of everything the left has wanted to do for years and years. You remember the famous or infamous statement by the presidential chief of staff that they never let a crisis go to waste, and boy, they didn't. And I know I'm vaguely among friends, and I hope it won't sound too McCarthyite to you if I say that they had an opportunity, they saw a very rare opportunity to socialize a country that has been resistant to such treatment. And there you have it. And you might have heard the other day, the vice president, I also can't believe that Joe Biden is vice president. When it comes to presidents, I prefer Darcy Olson. When it comes to vice presidents, I prefer Starley Rhodes. We have Obama and Biden said in one of the Sunday shows, well, as for the stimulus and its impact on job creation, everybody guessed wrong. Everybody you know, everybody you respect, everybody you consult, everybody you ever listen to. And so that was tough to take. And earlier I said that in the general election, Obama campaigned as a reasonable moderate. Nothing to fear, folks. Just be, all the scary talk about me as some sort of wild-eyed Marxist. He sounded like that son. It was just good old moderate me from the land of Lincoln. He did say a few days before the general election that his fundamentally the United States. He was going to affect the fundamental transformation of America. Imagine that. Fundamental transformation. Were we okay before? One of the best, freest, most liberal in the old sense, most decent countries in the history of man. A fundamental transformation. Well, thank you very much. And a lot of people in that party, and for Democrats here, forgive me for saying this, although they may concur, have hoped for a kind of Europeanization of America. They really haven't been very happy with American, the peculiarity of America. Some people call it American exceptionalism. They want us to be more of a social democracy, such as the ones they admire abroad, especially in Europe. And I do believe that Obama is basically that type. In his campaign, he was interesting as a personality, and a lot of people found him interesting as a rhetorician. I think there's absolutely nothing interesting about him as a politician and a policy guy. He was just an orthodox left liberal. He was a McGovernite, McGovernite with style, with pizzazz. Bill Clinton, when he ran in 1992, ran as, you might say, posed as, a new Democrat, someone associated with the Democratic Leadership Council and so on. He bucked orthodoxy in a few ways, but Obama was just warmed over McGovernism. And that great crack. I remember I was so proud. I was a graduate student, and I borrowed George Will's crack about how in 1964 Barry Goldwater ran for president, and 16 years later, when all the votes were in, it turns out he won. And I remember I was rebuked by my department chairman, Steve Thernstrom, who was then semi-socialist and is now published in National Review, thank you very much, along with his wife, Abby. He said, basically said, don't be so cute about that. If a liberal Democrat was elected, are we going to say that years later McGovern won? And I must say I thought of that when Obama and Biden won. And, it seems to me that Obama is so wedded to the orthodoxy, he can't even do the right thing on sorry, just caught sight of a picture of Bill Buckley, reminded me I missed him a little. He can't even do the right thing on education. And when he tries to say that he is someone who is willing to buck the old democratic, capital D democratic establishment, he sometimes talks about making the teachers' union ill at ease because he's made some murmurings about merit pay, I think. But his true colors came out really on the school choice issue in Washington, D.C. And this was just a little program, a good program. It gave poor children, disadvantaged children, a chance for decent education. It helped single mothers. It was really something people who call themselves liberal should support, but they just couldn't stand it and had to squash it. As they were funding everything else in America except maybe me and you, they decided the school choice program simply couldn't stand. There they were, like a latter-day Lester Maddox or something, standing in the schoolhouse door. And I think it's shameful. And let me mention something I mentioned to a group last night. I wonder if you agree. The school choice issue is a pretty good issue for us because the Democrats are embarrassed by it. Because when it comes down to it, they're really blocking educational opportunity, blocking a better life for a lot of people who are poor and usually minority. And that's something that ought to rub against their conscience. So you can kind of get them on it. And I remember talking to Milton Friedman once about why school choice is so hard to do something about politically, legislatively, but it seems such a no-brainer, such a good idea. And he said, it's a very easy issue to demagogue. And then he said something like, the problem with school choice as an issue, with getting it passed, is it involves caring about other people's children. And some people aren't very good about that. And Hillary Clinton used to say in her It Takes a Village period, there's no such thing as someone else's child. Yes, there is. There certainly is in the eyes of many. And if I could tell another Phil Graham story, he was my favorite interview in politics. I could go on about Graham. I just love this. He was on McNeil Laird or something one night with a typical member of the education establishment, what Bill Bennett used to call the blob. You know what he means. And Graham said, and I won't do the twang, was actually a Southern brawl. He's a Texas politician, but from Georgia. At any rate, he said, my education policy is based on the fact that I care more about my children than you do. And the education lady said, no, you don't. And Graham said, okay, what are their names? Barack Obama had an idea about American national security. And that is he would do the opposite of what George W. Bush did, whatever that was. He was going to anathematize unspeakable trade-off between security and civil liberties, and boy, we could have both, and it wasn't Bush an ogre and a dangerous, un-American type. And then Obama takes office as commander-in-chief, and it's his responsibility to fend off Islamofascism and his companion ideologies. Now it's on his shoulders. And he gets a little humbler, but just a little. And I always thought that might be the case, because there's something about assuming the office that has a sobering effect. It wakes you up, because you walk in that day, it's the afternoon of January 20th, and the football is next to you, and the nuclear controls, and you have responsibility, and you ought to grow up pretty quickly. And campaign rhetoric is one thing, and being commander-in-chief is another. But to a degree, Obama was stuck with his campaign rhetoric, particularly on Guantanamo Bay. And what George Bush used to say was, they can revile me all they want and say what a bad guy I am, but I see the threat assessments every morning in the Oval, and I know what's out there, and it's my job to keep the American people safe. It's on my head, no one else's. And remember when they were screaming at Bush that he had failed to connect the dots? That was the big thing. He didn't connect the dots. So he acts to connect the dots. The lots of clandestine programs that you can read about on the front page of the New York Times. And then he was a bad guy. And then he was a black hat. Because he was implementing these measures in order to safeguard the homeland. I've never been comfortable with that phrase, by the way, Department of Homeland Security. It sounds, I don't know, vaguely un-American to me, but there we have it. And I'm proud to say that the late Dick Walters, General Vernon Walters, agreed with me. We discussed this once. Homeland is like the Rhodian in Russia. Heaven forbid the Vaterland, but anyway, the Department of Homeland Security. And Obama did sober up a little. And he found that George W. Bush and his people were not so stupid with their intercepts, with their rendition, with their military tribunals, and so on. So he paid Bush a compliment of adopting all of these policies, these measures, and these programs, while continuing to announce them in his rhetoric. And as far as Guantanamo Bay is concerned, I thought this might have been embarrassing for the president. His attorney general, a very left-wing guy, Eric Holder, went down to Guantanamo and pronounced it a well-run professional facility. What do you know? Thank you very much, Eric. And a great question we've had, and I sound like a broken record, I've said this a lot for the last few years, is does the Democratic Party recognize that we're in something worthy of the name war on terror? Is it a war? A kind of war like the Cold War, another long twilight struggle, as JFK said? Or is it a matter of little police action and some taking them to court, some intelligence gathering? You remember when Caius bombed the World Trade Center for the first time in 1993, we took them to court. It wasn't a big bombing, a mere 6 people died, but we took them to court in conventional ways. And one of the World Trade Center bombers skedaddled off into the arms of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. But of course, Saddam had no connection whatsoever with terror. But we took him to court. And George Bush said on September 11th, this is a new age, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to try something else. And what will Obama do? Do you remember when right-wingers said things like, if a liberal Democrat is elected president and becomes commander-in-chief, we'll be reading terrorists their Miranda rights. Ha ha. It's just a bad right-wing line. Well, that seems to be in the offing. We also said, they'll be dictating policy to the auto manufacturers. Ha ha. They're just be careful what you joke about today. It may be new national policy next week. And some people do say, and I'm inclined to buy this. This is something that my colleague Rick Brookhiser has said for a long time. It's important that Democrats be involved in what some of us still call the war on terror, because if this is to be another long twilight struggle, we will have both Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. And it's simply unsustainable to have one party that sees the need for this and another party that does not. And also, this is a very bad thing to say, and I apologize to Democrats in the room, but some people said for years that they won't really get with it and support it unless they're in charge. And that may be true of Republicans too, in other situations and other times. Well, the Democrats are in charge, both in the executive branch and in the legislative branch, and they do, so to speak, own the war on terror. And let's see whether we're all Americans or not. And I trust that the answer is yes. I think it's indicative of a certain mindset that we have these euphemisms from the Obama administration. It's not the war on terror. It's overseas contingency operations. And Arizona's own Janet Napolitano dubbed terrorism man-caused disaster. Well, that doesn't make it any better. And I've written down here something Thomas Sowell wrote. And I regard almost everything Thomas Sowell says is worth writing down. He said, President Obama can ban the phrase war on terror, but he cannot ban the terrorist war on us. And I think that is right. And it's probably not every day that someone quotes Lenin at the Goldwater Institute. But he had an enduring insight. He said, you may not like war, but war likes you. You may not want it. Who wants it? It'll seek you out and hunt you down. And this is, I think, a question for foreign policy, for this war on terror. Was it visited on us? Are we visiting something unprovoked on someone else? War has a way of finding you, and you can choose to fight it or not. And that's a question that everybody needs to grapple with. And I do hope the Democratic Party at large, during the time of Obama, will become more tough-minded about real threats that America faces, and will cease to regard those threats as products of a Republican paranoid imagination. Some people say, this may go a little far, that there's a kind of war on exceptionalism by Obama and his people, American exceptionalism. We've been this special nation, this special role in the world. You don't have to be a full-blown Reaganite or Reaganaut, which was the original term coined by Dick Allen, to believe that. And Obama was asked about this when he was abroad, about whether he believed in American exceptionalism. He gave kind of a cute grad school answer. He said, I believe in American exceptionalism, just as I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism, and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. Well, that's very nice. But I thought of something that the first Bush said in his convention speech in 1988. He had this line about his opponent, Michael Dukakis. And he said, he sees this as a Paganini line, well, the speech was. He said, he sees America as another pleasant country on the UN roll call, somewhere between Albania and Zimbabwe. And I see America as the leader, a unique nation with a special role in the world. Maybe more troubling to me than Obama's core policies have been his foreign policy gestures. I could count them up. There was the bowing to the king of Saudi Arabia, a little bit distasteful. We're a republic, we don't bow to monarchs. And his yucking it up with Daniel Ortega and semi-apologizing for the Bay of Pigs, which was certainly an honorable effort. And it was a shame that it failed. His yucking it up with Hugo Chavez, that some of the Americans, he called Chavez mi amigo. And Chavez is not the friend of any Democrat with a small d, not any. There was Obama's New Year's message to the people, and get this, leaders of Iran, he said, and we want a relationship with you based on mutual respect. If you know anything about that, some people call mullahocracy in Tehran, there's nothing to respect. Forgetting its belligerent foreign policy, its threat to wipe our allies off the face of the earth. What about what that regime does to some people, to the Iranian people? It bulldozes them. And we've seen that on the streets lately. It's a very exciting development, by the way. And there are other things. And I must say that these gestures, these acts, some of them merely symbolic, like inviting Iranian envoys to 4th of July parties at embassies and consulates around the world. You say, oh, no big deal, it's just an invitation. Lighten up, for goodness sakes. We're all a diplomatic corps. It does mean something. It does mean something. It sends a signal to would-be reformers, to liberals in the old sense, to Democrats with small d abroad. It sends a signal to them that the freedom agenda is well and truly dead, and that our goal now is to get along with dictators. And American foreign policy, I will not wax long on that, I promise, but there should be some sort of mixture of idealism and hard-headed self-interest, naked self-interest. America's not the kind of nation, at least historically, that can have a foreign policy without a dose of morality in it. And I often quote what the Soviet dissidents used to say, Vladimir Bukovsky said. He said to Western policymakers, he said, as you go about making your policy and making your decisions and so on, ask yourself now and then, how will it look to the boys in the camps? How will it look to the boys in the camps? And George W. Bush had that in mind, and I think we all should. A little bit about Obama as personality and world figure, he is a kind of rock star. I've seen this in travels around the world. He's a genuine celebrity. There are T-shirts with his visage. It looks like a Che Guevara T-shirt. I remember I was in Davos and they ran praises of Obama from people around the world on a continuous loop. And they were literally singing praises of Obama. It was a little bit culty and creepy. And I see instances of this in New York too. And something happened the other day that I wrote about 2 weeks ago. I was riding the subway. There was a woman sitting across from me with a little blue book. And it had this silhouette on it. It was a little book, it looked like a devotional thing. And it was Obama, with Obama sayings and speeches and so on. And it was, you know, it's a legitimate publication, but I thought it's just a tiny bit creepy. Obama. And I think it will wear off among many. I don't think it will wear off among all. He'll always have some of that. As for Obama's likability, I don't know, I'm sort of lukewarm. Remember when he said he was Democrats' primary opponent? You're likable enough, Hillary. I suppose that's true of Obama. He does have immense self-regard. You remember, among other things, he gave to Queen Elizabeth as a gift an iPod with his own speeches uploaded onto it. And a friend of mine forwarded me a story about this, and she said, I prize this phrase. She said, "Who is this monster?" And I think that Obama's been sickeningly ungracious to President Bush while abroad. For example, he's at a student forum in Turkey, and he says, a student says, well, it sort of invites him to denounce President Bush. And instead of saying, look, I'm the American president, I represent the whole nation, I'm on foreign soil, he goes ahead and does it and says, you know, George Bush didn't believe in climate change, said our president on Turkish soil. First of all, that's an interesting word, believe. Believe in climate change. But, you know, President Bush gave plenty of speeches about that. He had a different approach to climate change. He just didn't think that the approach involved the leveling of the American economy. I think we'll find out more and more whether Obama is a traditional American liberal, more like a European style or Latin American style social democrat. And I was very interested in the inauguration of the new Salvadoran president the other week, a man named Funes, who's an old FMLN man, part of the Marxist guerrillas, a once hard leftist, now a sort of some kind of leftist, elected president of El Salvador, replacing a conservative. And he said, you need not fear my radicalism. I'm a social democrat in the tradition of Barack Obama in America and Lula da Silva in Brazil. And I thought that was an extremely interesting grouping. I want to get to questions, but also just say a few more words. Boy, do I have a lot more. I often hear about, I was just talking about this in a radio interview this afternoon, the American DNA. Or, you know, we're a commercial republic. It's in our DNA. We will never accept socialization. We will never accept becoming a European-style social democracy. I wonder whether nations have DNA. I'm not so sure. I think it depends on who's there and what they're taught and which way the cultural winds blow. I think you have to earn it. You have to fight to keep it in every generation. It reminds me of the old Ben Franklin line, after the Constitutional Convention, a republic if you can keep it. And you remember that hippy-dippy song from the 1960s, I think, teach your children well. It's true. It's true. There's a point to that. There are plenty of Americans who would not only accept, but actually pine for the Scandinavian model. And such old-fashioned virtues such as self-reliance are very old-fashioned indeed. So I don't know. I do believe that nations can change character. And there's a backdoor entrance. And I must say that I'm sobered by the example of Britain. Whether Britain today really is Britain as we have known it not very long ago. And I'll tell you a quick story told to me by my friend and colleague David Preston. Well, there was someone in Britain called a metric martyr. He was a greengrocer. And he offered his customers a choice. They could buy the goods in metric measures, European style, or in traditional English measures, imperial measures, pounds, ounces, gallons, and so on. Well, because of the EU law, he was prosecuted. He was known as the metric martyr, this greengrocer. And I said to Price Jones, well, how could the British people permit this? It's their system. And David said, an extremely perceptive, even deep comment, the British people would not permit it, but do they still live here? He didn't mean physical beings. He meant in spirit. And I take it as a very sobering example for the United States. But I'll try to end this portion with a little bit of uplift. As I said, we're kind of sleeping and not dead. And we can pick our battles and win what we can win. I'm all that discouraged about health care, frankly. We took this on in 1993 and 1994. We can do it again. And we should provide an alternative. And I say, pardon me for saying we. I mean, let's say Reaganites should provide an alternative and not fear to block that which is bad just because it's bad. In the early 90s or mid-90s, a lot of Republicans said, Bob Dole, Republicans said, what's going to happen anyway? Let's just try to limit the damage, make it a little less bad. And other people who were kind of firecrackers said, no, it's a terrible idea, it would be bad for the country, it needs to be stopped. Let's just stop it altogether. It deserves snuffing out. And lo, they did. It's going to be harder this time because there are fewer Republican votes. But it's certainly worth doing. And my idea is that if your cause is a little bit down, you leave the light on, so to speak. You leave a light burning so that people can be drawn to it again, have something to come home to. At least bear the alternative aloft, whether people want it or not. And majorities change all the time. Look, after the 2004 election, the Democrats were whining about whether they were a permanent minority. Kerry had just been beaten, and Bush was supposed to be unpopular, and they were down in the legislative branch, and gee, are we a permanent minority? Will we ever win again? It was only in 2004. And there's so much defeatism among Republicans now. And I remember when the Democratic Party was supposed to be finished because Reaganism had killed it off once and for all. And the Labour Party in Britain was supposed to be finished because Thatcherism was supposed to have killed it off. And then Labour was in power, has been in power for all this time. The Tories have said, gee, will we ever win again? Well, there is something cyclical about politics, and the wind does change. But it also helps to change it as well. And that, I think, can be done. And I've said that Lenin is very often quoted in the Goldwater Institute. I bet Jimmy Carter isn't either. And he said something in the 1976 campaign. It was one of his slogans, besides, why not the best? You remember that? It was a little bit innocent. Hyman Rickover had asked him what his place had been, Annapolis, and he said, 106th or whatever. And Rickover said, why not the best? So that was Carter's campaign slogan, the title of his campaign memoir. But Carter also said, and I like this was after Vietnam, Watergate, and so on. We should adapt to changing times with unchanging principles. And I know that the Goldwater Institute is in accord with that. They do such good work, and I hope they keep going and will keep going at National Review. Thank you for listening to all this, and I hope you had many questions. Thanks again.